Let's get started. Thank you for joining Cycognido's webinar, Evaluating Attack Surface Management Solutions with GigaOm. My name is Tim Matthews. I am Head of Marketing here at Cycognido, and I am joined by Chris Ray, our guest speaker, who is an analyst at GigaOm. Chris recently wrote and released the GigaOm Radar report for attack surface management, which we'll be talking about today. And I'm happy to have Chris here because he's both a former practitioner in cybersecurity from financial services, healthcare, and tech, as well as an analyst. So he'll give us a good balanced view of how to look at and evaluate this technology. Just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, so we'll share it afterward so you can actually go back and refer to it or share it with your colleagues. We're also going to have Q&A with Chris at the end, but you can feel free to put your questions in using the Q&A box, should be at the bottom of your screen, and I'll go through those at the end of today's session. Okay, so let's then move on to what we're going to talk about with Chris. We can have the next slide, please. Really, there are 4 areas that we're going to ask Chris to cover. First of all, diving into GigaOm's analysis of the market and its role in general in securing digital assets. And then importantly, what's new? Some of the new capabilities that are required in an ASM platform and how they've evolved. Importantly, how do you drive adoption if you decide to move ahead with an ASM platform? How do you make sure it's utilized inside your organization? And then lastly, a selection criteria. How do you decide what ASM platform makes sense for you? And then, as I said, we'll have a Q&A session. So Chris, welcome. I think to start, what makes the most sense is for you to maybe take the viewers through the most recent radar or just orient them and explain to them what's new and what's changed.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, for having me. This is one of my favorite topics because, like you said, former practitioner, I've experienced a lot of pain and suffering due to the shortcomings of various technologies. Not going to point any fingers, but I think many people who have tried to wrap their hands around the expanding, we call it the attack surface now, but digital footprint, everything that appears on the internet, inside, outside your perimeter, whatever you want to call it, that grows quickly. That is different. Its composition changes. It shrinks. It's a beast. So my background of tackling those problems for enterprises was pre-ASM. I prayed and wished and I hoped every day we could get something better than what we had. And then, as an analyst, early in 2020, when ASM started to really take off, I said, hey, we need to cover this. This is an important, impactful technology. So if we start at ground zero and talk about the GigaOm radar and how it's different than others out there. For one, they're written by practitioners like myself. They're not written by industry analysts. I'm technically an industry analyst now because here I am reviewing technology. I'm meeting with you. We're doing this webinar. Clearly, that's a role I'm in. But prior to this role, it was that of a hands-on practitioner. So because of that, when we start to cover a technology, we have to first define it. So table stakes. What are the minimum capabilities of this technology? We define those table stakes, and then that acts as our filter. That creates a circle around the technologies that we can now review. From there, we need to figure out how do we differentiate these technologies. And then by doing that, or the outcome of that process is we establish what we call key capabilities or key features. There's also emerging features. So what's new in the market, what's coming down the pike. When we do our survey, when we do our research and we collect all the information, all the vendors that you see on this very busy radar graphic, at the end of the day, what we have is a list of scores 0 to 5. We try to be as very direct and pragmatic as possible. 5 is excellent. 0 is it doesn't do it. And the sum of those scores doesn't directly relate to your placement on the radar, but it does indicate how well you're executing in a specific space. And the purpose of the radar isn't to identify the single best solution. That's not true. There's no single best solution for everybody. So the purpose of the radar is to help buyers, help people out there looking at ASM in this case, create a short list. And that short list is who you need to meet with to solve your problems. So what you're seeing here on the radar is the culmination of all that research and all that math plotted out 360 degrees, top to bottom, maturity versus innovation, left to right, feature versus platform play. Now, nobody's a pure anything. That's why there's gradients. There's some that are further to the left. There's some that are straddling a line. There's some that are leaders. There's some that are challengers, and there's some that are entrants.
Okay.
Does that satisfy the question there, Tim?
Yep, that was great. Thank you. Let's move on then. So this, I think, is the fourth year that you've done this particular radar. Maybe just generally, kind of what notable trends have you seen and have you observed in the market over the last year since the last time you did this?
Yeah, so let's start with version 1, 2020, 2021, whenever that was. ASM was really at its core, and what people were buying it for is it was a robust asset discovery tool. Um, if we then move ahead, 22, 23, people were starting to say, well, that's great. We can discover all these things we didn't know about, but we're still having to go and do manual efforts to figure out the vulnerabilities, identify where they are at in our tech stacks, who owns them, so then it solves that group of problems. We fast forward to 23, 24, getting into 25 now, and we're really looking at ASM becoming more comprehensive in what it does. So not just really good at discovering assets you didn't know you have, but really good at enumerating the vulnerabilities and determining, is this an actual risk to my organization, or is this just a high CVE score? Because those are two very different things.
Mhm.
Good ASM solutions will help you figure that out. Those that are like an ASM solution of 2020, 21, they'll give you a CVE score. They'll tell you maybe it's connected to these assets, but the rest is up to you. So that's really where I'm seeing the market go now, is evolving past the asset discovery. It's really good at finding not just virtual machines and exposed Kubernetes clusters, but also APIs and maybe third-party assets, SaaS solutions that are subdomains of yours, like a HubSpot or a Salesforce, whatever it may be.
Right.
And then tying those all together and saying, here's why this is a priority for you, or here's why it should be a priority for you.
Got it. So going perhaps a little bit more in depth or broader, perhaps in discovery with things like APIs, and then also helping people prioritize, right, and understand their risk based on more than just a CVE score, which we all know can really add up.
Right. Yeah. There's the understanding aspect of it. And one of the key features I've identified, which you guys do really well, is attack path analysis, because that's really a really useful way of visualizing your risk. It's like, why is this a risk? Well, you can look at text and it can tell you that this is a risk because it's a potential pivoting point to something internal. From there, they can go this way. Um, you know, this identity may be able to be compromised, that sort of thing. That's all text. That's great. You can read it and kind of visualize it. Attack path analysis abstracts that. It takes all the text out and it shows you visually why this is a risk. Having a
Got it.
good solution, a good method for visualizing your potential attack paths in the organization, that's really a good example of evolving beyond just asset discovery and basic vulnerability identification.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. So how about the business side and the regulatory side of the market? What's changed? We hear things about for perhaps cyber insurance benefits of using ASM. Are there any new compliance requirements? Can you speak to those two?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of that's a hallmark of a solution that's really practical, is when cyber insurance providers recognize that by doing this thing, you reduce your risk and therefore you are cheaper to insure. So almost anytime a solution has that capability where cyber insurers are looking like, hey, check the box. Are you or are you not implementing ASM in your security tooling or in your practices? That's generally a good indication that it's actually going to provide a practical benefit. And I am seeing that. There's some vendors have established partnerships with cyber insurers. They're like, hey, we're on the approved list. If you use us, then this will be easy to get your cyber insurance with this vendor. Then there are those that are, like, hey, we acknowledge that it's out there. We enable this capability. We can help you do it, and we'll provide attestations or documentation, whatever it is, to help your cyber insurer understand what's going on. On the compliance side, I'm seeing the maturing of solutions. In 2021, SOC 2 was kind of the baseline to entry. Everybody needed and had SOC 2. Fast forward to today, we're looking at some really niche certifications from some vendors, FedRAMP High in some cases. some European certifications, GDPR. Um, we're definitely seeing the growth in not just the tech, but the processes around it, because not all ASM solutions are pure tech. Some are service integrated.
Right. Got it. Okay. Great. So we touched a bit about on how the technology has emerged, and you've talked about, more granular or deeper discovery, perhaps with APIs, things like that. We've talked about, risk contextualization. How about in the area of validation or testing? What's changed there?
Yeah, so that's a really good example of going from where we were at 5 years ago to where we're at today. 5 years ago, it really was like an Nmap on steroids. It would find all the things you didn't know about without you having to tell it. And then it could, through passive enumeration, learn about the potential issues you have. But that was kind of the extent of it. That was about as far as they went. Compare that to today, which has to really, it's almost a table stake at this point. To be a good ASM solution, you need to do both passive and active. You need to not just collect telemetry, not just observe, but you also need to interact with services and see what the responses are, because that can be very telling for how the configuration is set. And that is ultimately what determines what risk is present.
Got it. Makes total sense. And for those who are, in your estimation, advanced in their use of ASM, what would you say characterizes an organization that's perhaps more advanced? What capabilities are they using or stressing or asking for from vendors?
So you'll see, once they've realized the value they get out of ASM, it's no longer the place that they go to learn. It's a portion or a process within their processes, meaning they want integrations into all the things. They want integrations into their service desk. They may want integrations into incumbent vulnerability scanners that they already have in their environment. They want integrations, and more integrations, because they don't want to be going to the ASM solution to learn about things. They want the ASM solution informing their processes.
Mhm. So in a more proactive way and actually being part of their kind of cyber process, of course, but actually pushing things out to perhaps different security teams and even other teams to let them know about issues.
Yeah, the ASM is, it's called attack surface management. It's really, its name is very security centric, but that's not to say only security can gain value from it. There's some operational use cases I've run across, such as many organizations have a decommission process for cloud assets. They change their Terraform or their cloud formation templates. They remove assets. They tear things down. They're like, okay, good, we're all set. But if any mistakes are made in that process or something fails to happen, the decommissioning process is incomplete. Assets can remain exposed. Services can remain live. That's where ASM can come in and say, hey, integrated with your service desk, we see these assets are in a decommission ticket. But by the way, this IP address is still active, or this S3 bucket still has data.
Right. Right. Makes sense. Okay. Let's go back to perhaps a more nascent use of ASM, someone who's just getting started. How would you advise them to, not just pick a technology, but scope out what they're going to try and do with this technology in the first year to 2 years of their journey?
A really popular way of doing this, because ASM discovers a lot. And it's really natural to want to boil the ocean without realizing that's what you're setting out to do. So you need to define very clearly the scopes of what you want to achieve, because you can't just say, show me everything I don't know about. That's what ASM essentially does. It tells you all the things that are in the dark. If you do that, you'll be overwhelmed. You won't know where to prioritize your efforts, even if the solution is giving you clear indications of where to start. So, a really good starting point is to say, our marketing folks kind of go ham. They go a little crazy signing up for these different services. We're not really sure. It's a lot of shadow IT, rogue IT. Let's scope this down to just, sorry, I keep getting calls. Let's scope this down to just focusing on the assets that we can attribute to the marketing team. Unless something really show stopping pops up, then let's focus just on marketing and let's measure that. Let's discover how many assets we don't know about. Let's quantify the risks on each of those assets, if there are any. And then let's see how quickly we can shore that up and fix it. And although
Right.
it's tempting to want to expand it because you'll quickly gain value and quickly start fixing things, just stay disciplined and focus on that one use case, whether that's a month, 6 months, a year. you can decide that, but you have to really scope it down, focus, be disciplined, and then you can step back and look at what did I achieve? Is it better? Is it worth it? Generally, you're probably going to find yes.
Right. Right. And maybe I'm being sensitive, but it always seems like marketing teams get picked on in the context of ASM. Are they really the culprits because they're spinning all kinds of stuff up without perhaps seeking permission?
Yeah, well, things like embedding cookies into applications so that they can get a better understanding of the user journey. That's great if done right, but it's really easy to do it incorrectly and accidentally share, very sensitive information with third parties you never intended to do it. Now, ASM probably won't find that stuff, but it will tell you that, hey, now you're using like an Osano, a cookie tracking, vendor.
Right.
I didn't realize that. That's not anywhere in our asset tables. Who's managing this? Who's the admin? How do we have it
Right.
configured correctly? So it prompts you to start asking those questions. You ask of everything else that gets onboarded.
Right. Now, how about people, and I've experienced this speaking to prospective customers, people are afraid of a deluge of stuff that A, they didn't know about, and B, is going to be a ton of work. I think that probably does worry some folks who are going to step into this world of ASM. What would you advise them to, or how would you advise them to think about this? Or
Yeah,
is that the way to think about it? Yeah.
there's two parts to this. One is acknowledging that that's probably a use case you're going to care about. And when I say it's a use case you're going to care about, I mean when you're shopping around for a solution, pose that problem to the vendor because you're going to meet with them. They're going to demo it. They may offer to stand it up and let you use it for a period of time. But make that very clear. Like, this is a concern we have because we can't operationalize it if it overloads us. It's actually going to be a detriment. So, how do you solve that problem? Number one, get that out there. Number two is it comes back to the scoping. Recognizing up front, you're probably going to get a lot of information on stuff you didn't know was out there. And preparing for that, you can say, let's scope this down. Let's focus on whatever logical unit we want to establish, and then create some objectives for what does that mean that we're going to focus on it. Well, that means we're going to compare what we know today and compare it to what it tells us about. So that's number one. Number two could be we can then contextualize the risks that it's telling us about. Number three is we can build remediation plans. And then number four is how long did we take to do that? And how successful were we compared to when we started to now? Is the ASM saying we're improving? Is it saying we're getting worse? So there's ways to quantify it. You have to develop that scope, quantify your outcomes, and then measure them.
Makes sense. Okay, great. I want to go back to a point you made about, integrations and, providing value within certain scopes. Have you seen ASM products successfully deployed and well integrated with development processes, whether it's DevOps or DevSecOps or some other way? Because I think that's a fear that dev teams have, or that security teams have. They're gonna send a bunch of stuff over to the dev team, and it's going to get ignored, or there's not going to be enough information. What have you seen in that realm?
Yeah, and that's a really good question because I haven't seen many do it, and even fewer do it well.
Hmm.
So if you're looking to the future and saying, I whatever by mandate, I need our security tools to be in our DevOps processes, or that's a direction we want to grow into. Obviously, establish that as a use case and ask questions. Don't just ask, do you integrate with whatever DevOps tooling you bring? Don't just ask those questions. Ask that plus, how do you integrate? Can you show me what value it gives your customers? Start asking really uh, rich questions around that and evaluating the responses that you get because it's really easy. Not you guys, I won't name names. It's really easy for a vendor to say, yes, we integrate with DevOps tools. And it may be the case. They may integrate. But what does that mean? It's a very gray area. So you have to really understand what you're getting into.
Right, makes sense. Yeah, I know that in the realm of vulnerability management, there's been, I'll call it fatigue, where the dev teams have been saying a lot of stuff that's irrelevant, or it theoretically is a vulnerability, but not in the context of how it's deployed. Are there any advantages or ways to make ASM work better? Because I think that's a fear people have. There's going to be, vulnerability management 2.0, and they're going to just send a bunch of noise over to perhaps their dev teams who are going to ignore them again.
Yeah, so that ties in really well to two key features I've identified: asset categorization and then asset correlation. I split those out. They were, I think, in version one of this report, they were just kind of together under a different name. And then I realized there's actually a lot of value in having measuring how each of those work independently. So asset categorization at a high level, think of it as identifying when something's a development tool or a development environment compared to a production environment. That's categorizing those assets in a meaningful way.
Mhm.
Generally, development environments shouldn't have any sort of production data in them. That's a standard that I hope everybody lives up to. So you can deprioritize those almost by rule. You can say we're going to make these informational events. In a good ASM solution, you can build policy that, based on asset categorization, allows you to manipulate what the risks are.
Yep.
The flip side of that is production. Obviously, maybe you elevate everything. If you're a smaller team, smaller environment, you can say anything in production that's found that's CVE this or higher, or risk measurement this or higher, bubble that up, send it to PagerDuty, whatever the case is, make it happen faster. And then the correlation, again, because not only are we categorizing, but we need to know how these assets are intertwined. How do they relate? Is there development assets that are shared by production? That's really bad, but it does happen. And sometimes it's a conscious decision. It's like we just can't afford, whatever the case is, whatever resource it is, we can't afford to do two of these. So we're going
Mhm.
to add mitigating controls to reduce the risk. But if you don't know about that, if it's an unconscious decision, if it just happens because the engineering team said this is the best way to do it given the constraints of our environment, and they move forward with it, well, you can't measure, you can't quantify that, you can't monitor it. That's a problem. So that's where the asset correlation comes in.
Got it. Okay. Just a couple more before we open up for viewer questions. So we've talked a little bit about this, but are there any things that you see in organizations that are successful with ASM, whether it's their maturity or cultural indicators of success, things that you could advise people on?
Yeah, so maturity doesn't play such a big role in this
No.
because ASM gives you the capabilities of a much more mature organization. It almost benefits less mature organizations because it now gives them that more comprehensive understanding of their attack surface. Attack
Mm,
surface, I mean publicly exposed assets,
sure.
the relationships of those assets, et cetera. So now you've essentially you have an army of analysts that are out there scouring the internet. That's what the ASM is doing for you, looking for assets that you need to be aware of and concerned about. So with less mature organizations, it's usually a greater benefit from day one to the end of year one. You see a boost in their security operations and in their practices. Um, I'm blanking on the second part of that. You had an and, what was that?
Oh, I was just talking about, whether it's maturity or it's some other cultural factor in
Yes,
order.
cultural factor. Yeah. You'll find organizations that and this is more the larger organizations, the large enterprise, public sector maybe. No matter how valuable the information is from anything, it's got to go through the process. And if that process takes 3 months to complete, it's really hard to look at the ASM solution and say, well, we didn't improve because the ASM didn't reduce our time to remediation. Well, is it the tool or is it your processes?
Right.
You see that a lot in larger organizations because they're like, hey, we're mature. We know how to handle everything that comes our way, run it through the process. Well, the problem there is those processes, can be the killer of your security operations efficiency.
Got it. Okay. Great. Okay, just a couple more then. Can you talk a little bit about Cognito? What you saw, strengths and weaknesses, how did you evaluate us?
Yeah. So, like I said before, we establish table stakes. That's like the box or the circle we draw around the vendors to say you are or you are not ASM. And then we differentiate using key features. And the key features I established, I'll run through them real quick. Attack path analysis, which we've talked about, the assessment of vulnerabilities, how you do that. We've talked about that. Internal ASM, which is taking what works really well about external ASM or ASM and taking an internal look and focusing on how can I benefit there. Risk scoring, asset categorization, the correlation, we've talked about those, and then third-party risk identification. Moving on past that, that's sort of the differentiating features. There's also emerging features. Emerging features are those that are kind of on the cutting edge. Some vendors have them, some do not. Their value may not be proven yet, but it's likely if they are providing value, they evolve and they mature and become a differentiating or a key feature. In this case, custom threat intelligence and dark web monitoring are the two emerging features. Specifically looking at Cycognito, I touched on this. The attack path analysis or visualizing the risks in your attack surface is really beneficial. It's really useful. The way you guys do it is really simple. Um, it it almost reduces the expertise or the skill needed to fully comprehend the risks as they are in your environment because it's like a picture book, right? You don't need to read if you want to pick up a picture book. You can just pick up the book and say, oh, I get it. Your method of assessing vulnerabilities was exemplary. I think is a good word for it. I think it's a standard that others are probably going to work towards. Um, and then your ability to categorize assets in a meaningful way to the buyers, not just categorizing them, looping them, or lumping them together as, hey, this is an AWS EC2 and this is an Azure virtual machine, but actually saying these are the business units or logical units where these are playing together, or these are the, whatever valuable way you want to represent it. That's these groups of assets. So those are kind of your big three. On the emerging feature front, your dark web monitoring, so bringing in data from, you know, I I hate saying dark web, but sources that are not easy to find on the internet, whether that's lists, that's forums, that's wherever data is for sale, and folding that in, which enriches your events. That adds the context that says, hey, we've noticed that your name or your key vendor, your key partner's name is really a hot topic right now in these forums. Because of that, we're going to adjust your risk rating on whatever the case may be.
I think a lot of people don't think about that, and some people call it the extended attack surface or the expanded attack surface is, things about your assets that are available for sale or for free in some cases on the dark web or other forums. And that is essentially, an asset of yours. It's a credential, it's, an exploit, whatever it happens to be. And I think people were only getting used to internal and external attack surfaces. Now we have this idea of other places people can go to learn about your organization and make your assets potentially even more vulnerable, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's move on to some questions from the viewers. I've got one queued up right here. It's a pretty good question, actually, and feel free to add more if you others have questions. Question is, are there a lot of customers who are leveraging ASM tools purely for discovery and feeding the list of assets into their existing vuln management or web app scanning tools to do deep dive scans? It's a pretty good question.
Yeah. So there is a group of buyers that's really what they're looking for. And kind of getting back to that radar graphic, if you remember, I said left or right is feature versus platform. Those kinds of buyers are probably going to be looking at solutions on the left side of the radar. Those are uh, solutions that are more focused, they're not as comprehensive. And at this point in time, a good ASM solution, whether it's left or right, feature or platform, it's going to provide you really, really good asset discovery. What you do with that discovered asset data is up to you. You may find that solutions on the right side of the radar are going to have features that you may not want or may not use because they're going to be a comprehensive ASM solution. If you're just looking for the discovery and the integration to your CMDB, ServiceNow, whatever it is, you're probably going to focus on the left side. But what happens, and this is a cautionary tale, is you do that, and then you still have the problem of once it's in your CMDB, you have questions popping up from business unit owners or team leads or the organization in general. It's like, okay, we didn't know we had this asset. Are we at risk? Well, now you have to go and manually do that. So that's the cautionary tale there is focusing on a vendor that just does really good discovery, but not so good on the vulnerability assessment or the risk categorization, risk scoring, whatever you want to call it. That can be a little short-sighted. But if you already know, if you have processes, or if you just know the culture and you're like, we're never going to get there, it's not for us, then there's no fault in focusing on really good asset discovery and the integration capability.
Okay, good. Another question, which I've heard before, I'll pose to you. False positives and validation. We previously tried an ASM solution that flooded us with false positives and unclear asset ownership. Has the market evolved in terms of asset attribution and noise reduction?
Yes. I'll say the market has generally evolved. Not to say all vendors have. And that's actually a table stake. So even taking a step further back, remember table stakes are what you have to do in order to be an ASM solution. I've established that false positive management has to be a core component of the solution because like, this guy or gal has experienced getting flooded with false positives from a solution that you just paid tens of thousands of dollars for is a really bad look for the security team. It definitely damages reputations. It makes your job harder trying to extract value from something like that. Kind of focusing more on where the landscape is today. Not all vendors do false positive management the same way, and there are some methods and approaches that are much more effective, whether that's human in the loop, whether that's some sort of machine learning or computer vision, or if it's just a combination of all of those plus statistical analysis, whatever the case is, you need to see the rationale as to why the risk exists. So look into the solution, find the event. It should be able to rationalize why is this considered a true positive? Why is this considered a risk? And ultimately, what it comes down to is you evaluate that rationale, you build a trust in the solution to be able to do that false positive management, and then you can progress from there. But to answer the question, there are solutions out there that don't handle false positive management very well. They have a high signal to noise ratio, and then there are solutions that do it exceptionally well.
Right. Okay. Great. Next one's from someone who I think who's obviously read your report. It's a pretty good question. So threat intelligence is still listed as an emerging feature. What is holding back broader adoption, and when do you think it will become table stakes?
I can't venture a guess as to what's holding back broader adoption. I hear from you guys, from vendors. I meet with 30 or 40 of them during the research phase, and they tell me my buyer's not asking for it, or my buyers are asking for it, but we're being careful that we don't break our risk scoring or that we don't change our risk prioritization weighted too heavily on it. It's just another component that we need to factor in. So there seems to be two things at play there. One is specific vendors are saying their buyers aren't asking for it, or that the results of that could be the case. Two is they're having difficulty figuring out the best use cases, where and how to use threat intelligence.
Mhm. Got it. Makes sense. Okay. We've got just two more left. So if anyone has another one, feel free to pop it in. Otherwise, we'll end a little early. Next one is, this might be a long answer. We'll see. I am flooded with vendor claims about AI. I'm sure a lot of it's hype, but some of it's real. What can you say about the AI usefulness or applicability in the realm of ASM?
Sure. So I agree with you. If a vendor is touting AI capabilities and not naming a specific technology of AI, so LLM for chat remediation, whatever the case may be, computer vision for analyzing screenshots of web servers, web hosts, any data that's gathered visually. If they're not naming specific AI technologies, that's an immediate red flag. If they just say AI powered or AI this, AI that, AI is
Mhm.
a very big umbrella that covers, I think, about 10, 11, 12 technologies right now. Um, of those 12 or so technologies, only three or four are really at the point of maturity where they're useful. That's
Yep.
LLM. We're seeing it, not just ASM, across all the topics I cover. We're seeing an explosion of LLM chatbots, and some are implemented in a really useful, practical way where you can interact with them and say, I've got this asset. It says it's this risk. What else should I be considering? How do I fix this? And they've tuned it and they've built it in a way that provides really good remediation advice and guidance and questions to ask and places to go and look. That can upskill a team really well. The computer vision one, that's a big one.
Mhm.
Obviously, ASM discovers assets. It finds things. It has login pages. It has advertisements. It has your logo. It needs to be able to understand that and then turn that digital picture into context for your environment. And then machine learning, which is probably one of the more mature ones. There's all sorts of flavors of machine learning, but generally asking questions. How do you do machine learning? Just keep it really vague in general, and see where the conversation goes. If they're using it for false positive management, that can be a good use case. If they're using it to build asset correlations, so they give a confidence level. If we think this asset's related to this one, 95% sure of that, or we think this one's related 20% sure of that. That
Right.
can help you eliminate some of that work. But in general, just AI, no mention of the specific technology, all sorts of red flags, almost to the point where I may not want to meet with them and spend an hour of time going through it. But if they can, in some sort of paper published on their website, whatever the case is, they can say we use LLM or we use machine learning to enhance or achieve or do, that's a really good starting point.
Right. Okay. Great. So last one in the queue. What can you say looking forward about the next radar you do? What do you see coming in terms of features that people should be maybe thinking about?
So ASM's on that evolutionary loop. It's on that journey. ASM 5, 6 years ago, asset discovery and basic vulnerability assessment, CVE based primarily. Uh, we look at today. Now it's all of that plus the context, bringing in dark web threat intelligence, doing the good asset correlation, helping prioritize risk work, in the future, I'm seeing it evolve. We're seeing it. I cover other spaces such as penetration testing as a service. Um, PTOS is a really good method for defining your pen testing scope. It's like if I give the example of the legacy pen testing approach, you define the scope up front. You have a PDF, you have whatever. You relay it to the project management team at the pen testing boutique. They define a scope, you sign off on it, and off to the races. With ASM, you can just say define a subdomain or define a domain that you care about, and then whatever you find there through ASM is now my pen testing scope. So that's one use case I'm seeing. I'm also seeing it pop up in CNAPs, so the cloud native application protection platforms.
Yep.
They're using it in a way to inform security teams of assets that they may not be aware of. It's
Hmm.
really good at providing that information, even though they have, they've connected their CNAP solutions to their cloud services or to their cloud service providers. That still doesn't give you a complete picture of everything that's running inside of that cloud. So the ASM component there is it shows you the outside in view. CNAP gives you the inside out, and then from there they're tying those results together and showing, here's what the attacker might see. Here's the assets on the back end. Here's how your risks are presented.
Got it.
So
Great.
I was gonna say the takeaway there is ASM is becoming a feature of other things. Do I think ASM is going to go away in the next 5 years? No. I do think you're going to find solutions that give you ASM where you may not be expecting it.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Well, Chris, thank you. It's been, as usual, very insightful, and thanks to all of our viewers. Just a reminder, this has been recorded, so we'll provide a recording out for you and for your colleagues. If you would like a copy of Chris's report, you see the QR code on the screen. You can follow that link, and it will take you to a download page. And with that, thank you for everyone's time, and enjoy the rest of your day.